The first 90 days after you sell your company are really what you expect. They're, in fact, a lot quieter. It's more internal and often a lot more disorienting than dramatic. It's entirely different when you're going through the whole M&A aspect. And so today I want to share what that period really feels like, not from theory, but from lived experience. I mean, I did sell Mercatus Technologies at the bottom of 2023. In fact, it was December 18th. It was a Monday. We closed the deal. And it was a process that we had started July 27th of that same year. So a bit of a whirlwind experience. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Built to Hold. I'm your host, Sylvain Perrier, group leader at Vertus. And this podcast is for founders who have built durable businesses and want a clearer understanding of long-term ownership without the hype, no pressure, and certainly no sales pitch. And today's episode is quite personal. It's called From Founders to Operators, the first 90 days after a close. I spent decades on the operating side of businesses, but I've also lived the experience of selling my own organization. And what struck me the most wasn't what changed externally. It was what shifted internally for my team, internally for myself. And this episode's not going to be about deal mechanics. It's about identity, leadership, patience, and perspective. So if you're a founder wondering what the first 90 days actually feel like, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. Day one doesn't feel like a movie, surprisingly enough. There's no dramatic shift. There's no confetti. There's no parade. No one's walking around giving you high five. And guess what? There's no collapse, certainly not in my case. And, the fact is, what's really surprising, it's kind of normal how it feels. It's a bit of, I don't want to take away from the emotions that certainly I felt or what others would feel. It's a bit of a reset period, those first 90 days. The team will still look at you. Customers are still going to call you. Systems don't magically change overnight. But what does change is a little bit more subtle. You're no longer carrying the existential risk of having to support the business, potentially financially, spirit and energy. And that can be, quite frankly, relieving. But at the same time, it could be also quite destabilizing. And it certainly was for me those first 90 days. And I acknowledge that today after a few years. And as a founder, you shift away from being kind of a little bit of that center of gravity. And what you realize is after the close, you're part of a significantly larger orbit. You shift from owner to steward, your decision maker to collaborator, builder to an operator, especially if you were bought by a considerably larger organization. And in my case, that certainly was what occurred. And to give you perspective on my story, we had made the decision in July of 2023. We were approached by a U.S. entity to acquire us. We were very interested because they brought a lot of skill set to the table, the leadership team. They were much bigger than us. They had complementary products. And I felt, along with my leadership team and the board of directors, that the amalgamation, the bringing of the two organizations together would create significant greater value for the shareholders, but also overall for the market and our customers. I had mentally prepared myself leading up to the day that the transaction was going to close. I was fine. I had reconciled that my role was going to shift from being the entrepreneur in-house, the CEO, to potentially a different role or potentially no role. And I was quite comfortable with that. Luckily, I stayed on board as a global chief operating officer, running 4 offices on a global basis. But that alone was a shift, because the dynamics at the table changed. Now, what I was more concerned about at the time is that, and I realized that today, from my learnings, is that some founders start to focus and prove that they still matter. And that's not just for the founders. When you shift over from being a CEO, maybe staying as CEO, but part of a bigger team, maybe with a more sophisticated board of directors, you try to prove yourself. I've also seen that occur quite fundamentally with members of the senior leadership team. So you have to keep an eye out for that, right? They want to prove that they still matter. And sometimes trying to do that rubs people the wrong way. It's not executed entirely well. I mean, they don't understand that you're part of a bigger team. You start to push harder on certain things when it's not really necessary. So you lose a sense of focus and direction. In my case, what I really wanted to make sure is when we notified our customers on what I like to call day zero. Day zero is that next day after a transaction is signed, when you bring the employees up to speed simultaneously, if not just before, you're reaching out to your customers. You want to let your customers know that everything's going to be okay. There isn't going to be any issues. But you can lose sense of what do you need to focus on. And so I think having that battle plan in advance of what does a day zero look like? What does a day one look like? I also like to stretch it out to a day 2 and a day X. And then you get into your full integration process. Integration process is not just a term that's loosely used. It's not just financial systems. It could also be culture, human resource systems, also technology, and so on. Again, it really fundamentally depends what the structure of your transaction looks like. The other one that I realized, and I was quite clear in the ownership that acquired us, I wasn't going to prescribe to defending legacy decisions. Legacy decisions and decisions in general, when you're an owner, operator, an entrepreneur at heart, they are made in the moment with the best amount of data that you have. And so if you run a tight ship, those types of legacy decisions aren't necessarily an issue, but they can arise as an issue. So I found that some founders in the first 90 days will get very defensive and want to say, hey, I made that decision and here's why. I mean, and so there's a loss of energy. It's historic, decisions made, move on, and so on. The fourth one, and this is a bit of a got you. Again, I had really done a lot of soul searching from July to when we were going through due diligence in August and September to lead to a transaction close in December, is you start to resist the integration reflex. So there is a process to integrating. It needs to be pre-planned, pre-closing, when you get a good sense that it is going to happen. And it's not just on the acquiring party, but it's also on the team. Your senior leadership need to be brought up to speed. And there's a right time to let them know you've made the decision to sell the business and the rationale behind it. I took a different approach. I was very open and transparent early on. The reason for that is enterprise-grade business. You need a lot of hands around the table to lift. And I thought that was quite important to bring the senior leadership up to speed early on. Some businesses that are a little bit smaller will decide not to do that, I think, for various reasons. It could be for confidentiality. It could be you don't want to scare the team. I mean, there are various reasons for that. The healthier move, and I recommend this to a lot of owners of businesses, that, here at Vertus, when we do an acquisition, is take the time to observe, learn the new system, and don't hesitate to ask questions. And it's a two-way street. We will ask all the questions that are necessary to be able to support you running your business. We'd ask that you do the same. So if you're a founder, an owner operator out there, and you've been acquired or about to go through an acquisition, step back. And I know that you're surrendering a lot of your blood, sweat, and tears in the context of the business that you built, but take the time to observe and learn, and don't be so quick to form an opinion. Quite frankly, I mean, that was the big thing for me was get to know the individuals that you potentially are going to work with well in advance and through the journey, which was great. It was a great 2-year segue from bottom of 23 to the bottom of 25 when I decided to leave, and I left on my own. Listen, being a global COO is great. It's taxing in certain instances, but it's quite rewarding. Now, contrary to fear, and I need to share this with you, here's the thing. You don't lose authority overnight. There's a lot, your team is still there. Yeah, there's new people at the table, but most of the time, if not, I'd say 99.9% of the time, there's a lot of respect for the founder and the owner of the business. So your authority isn't going to fleet overnight. Strategy doesn't evaporate. You are being acquired for a very specific reason. It could be for a roster of fantastic clients. It could be a great leadership team. It could be revenue. It could be great product. It could be all of those things that are brought together. And that's why you were acquired. So I think celebrate those things and take the time to amplify them when possible. The team, your employees, won't stop respecting you. They know you. They've seen you at your best. They've seen you, chances are sometimes at your worst. I mean, we all have our bad days, quite frankly. Not every day is rosy and perfect in the world of vertically managed software businesses. There are challenges. It could be a challenge of you've lost a customer. It could be you're having a resource issue within the business, or you're stretching every dollar because you want to grow the business rapidly and fast, so you're being conservative in everything that you do. When you're an owner and operator, I always say the moment you step off the elevator or the moment you unlock the front door and you turn on the lights, you're on stage. So people are looking at you, and they will respect the decisions that you make. So that's not abandoned on an overnight basis. So what changes is just context at the end of the day. Now, decisions live inside. There's broader capital allocation that likely is frameworks in this case. There's a portfolio thinking if the organization that acquired you has multiple holdings. That was the case for me. We had offices in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. We had an office in Tel Aviv. We had an office in Toronto. And then our headquarters was in Houston, Texas. So each of those cities was represented by a different organization. So there was cross-collaboration, but there was a portfolio mindset. And you had to be mindful that maybe a decision that you wanted, specifically in my case, because I wanted to implement an operational program at a global level, it may or may not have applied in certain regions of where we were operating, and that's okay. So you have to adjust your style of thinking and decision making, right? It's also, a lot of it is shared best practices. Although I was part of the senior leadership team, and no different if you're being acquired by a conglomerate, is there's always going to be shared practices that they're going to bring to you. So be open and receptive to those. And in some other cases, hey, you may have had a great aha moment in the past, but how do you take that knowledge and share it back to the people that acquired you? I think having that mindset of shared frameworks, shared business practices is of great importance. And there's going to be different risk tolerance. I think that's obvious when you're an entrepreneur and you've grown up in the business and you know your customers in your vertical, you know when to take those small, if not large, big bets that you hope are going to pay dividend, and then you can take on that risk. You wear it yourself, and in some cases you wear it financially on your own. But when you become part of a larger organization, risk is calculated at a different level. And I think some entrepreneurs will find that constricting because they'll say, well, I can't make the same decisions I used to make. Well, that's the reality of it. And that's okay. I mean, you just have to get used to it. And it can feel constraining at first, but I think at the same time, it can feel quite stabilizing. I mean, I will relate to my case. Great senior leadership team. So when decisions were being made, there was a lot of mind share at the table to be able to debate, to think through, and to do the proper risk analysis to mitigate any potential future issues that could have arisen from a bad business decision. Now, so I want to share this with you guys. So what are the common founder mistakes in the first 90 days? Trying to run at pre-close speed. It's impossible, right? So if you've elected to sell your business and you've brought in a broker or an investment banker or someone that you trust to kind of run a process for you, you do know that once you have your teaser, your IM, and everything's ready for you, chances are there's going to be multiple parties at the table if you're lucky, and then you're having to meet and present and demo your technology repeatedly over and over and over again, and it can feel really daunting. At some point, you're going to execute a letter of intent, and then you're into the due diligence phase. And bankers or brokers will tell you, well, it's okay, our team is here, we'll handle the lift, and so on. The harsh reality of that's rarely the case. It's you and your team that shoulder the heavy lift in preparing content for the deal room and the due diligence material, whether it's financial statements, whether it's list of customers, HR census. I mean, the list goes on. And it's long days, and it can get frustrating, and you can get irritable quite quickly. I suggest patience. It is a process. You have to follow it. And also be prepared to, fail and things not to go the direction that you want. And there's certain things you can't manage or calculate through, right? Shifts at the macroeconomic level that may have an impact on your customers, shift in a specific industry that may affect deal size and so on, or the loss of a customer in the middle of negotiating a deal. I had that case happen. We churned a customer during the negotiations, and absolutely it did affect the price for the business. And there was, lessons learned that I would take, but they do happen, and then you have to move on, right? Reacting emotionally to governance has no value for anyone. I think that when you're an owner-operator and a large shareholder within the context of a business, it's easier to make decisions. You're close to your board, less friction in that sense. But when larger corporations come to acquire you, they will come, doesn't mean that the experience will be transactional, very much about relationships. I know we are here at Vertus. It's important that we have good rapport with the owner-operators of the businesses we're interested in acquiring. But there is a certain level of governance that occurs within the context of a deal process. And also post 90 days, right? And post 90 days, in terms of integrating HR, the legal aspect, tax aspect, that's okay. You can get frustrated by, again, patience is important. Confusing alignment with loss of control. What I've seen historically is just because you may not be aligned with the direction that the company that acquired you wants to go, doesn't mean you've lost control, right? I always say, like, very much focus on understanding, collaborating and understanding, making sure you're standing shoulder to shoulder with the business that acquired you to make sure that you know how to move things forward so you avoid this, right? This is a very common founder mistake in the first 90 days. The last one here is seeking reassurance through activity. In many cases, when you're acquired, the first 90 days, they are tremendously hectic, not like the deal process, but nonetheless quite hectic. And you will have multiple people coming in and out, legal, HR, tax, both sides, your senior team, the new senior team, realigning employee commitments, talking to customers, amalgamating customer bases, and so on. So that alone is very daunting. And so you may not know where you stand at any given single moment. So getting busier to try to create a reassurance, it's not going to work. You're just going to further bury yourself. If you're not sure if you're progressing in the right direction or you need that level of reassurance, ask. Now, the one thing that I had to change is, I'd spent 21 years reporting up to a board of directors, and I had to check in with them on a quarterly basis, but I also had to check in roughly every 2 weeks, typically on a Tuesday for me, which I thought Tuesday was great because I could prepare over the weekend, ensure everything was aligned, and then send it to the board members on the Tuesday. The reality is, when I became Global Chief Operating Officer, I reported to a CEO. And the one thing that I really made sure is that I wanted to manage up consistently to ensure I knew where I sat. So when I would get to my one-on-ones with my CEO, or we would have leadership meetings, or we would have challenges or things just kind of pop up in the business, he knew right away what I would be deprioritizing. He knew right away what I would ship. So I would just prepare an email with everything that I've accomplished for the week. Sounds daunting, not really, but it ensured that the operations team, which was the nerve center of the organization, apart from engineering, that the entire group was executing against the vision that was laid out by the CEO. So I think that helped me tremendously. I'm not sure if that's something that could help you. And the 90 days, for me, was less was more. And so focus on restraining, only doing the things that matter to stabilize, assemble, and then propel and move forward at a faster pace. A lot of it was kind of curtailing ambition, and so I do recommend that. So what does a healthy transition include, right? Well, fewer declarations. I always feel that when you make broad statements that you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you get everyone excited, you're on your soapbox. I think that needs to be kind of tapered a little bit. A lot more questions. Put your thinking cap on, ask those fundamental questions. Clear communication to the team. Your team's going to be nervous. They're going to be looking at you. They're going to be looking at the new leadership structure, all the new people that they're going to meet. They want to feel reassured that they have a home here. So you need to really focus on that. I always recommend, once you announce the news on day 0 to your employees, you go into breakout sessions by department with your department heads, and then you go and meet with your key employees one-on-one, and you maintain that practice at least for 30 days. So consistent weekly town halls, if not bi-weekly. Ask the new leadership team to join you so they can see the relationship that's being created and that they are seeing the two groups to come together. I think that's paramount to success in the first 90 days. Patience with new reporting rhythms. I will say that is probably one of the bigger challenges that I also see, as a strong success criteria in the first 90 days. My example, again, reporting up to my CEO every week, and then the monthly reporting, the multiple meetings with the board of directors, the new investors. They really want to make sure things come together quick, so you're out of the starting gate fairly quickly. Also that you've stabilized what may need to be stabilized. So if you're having to bring products together, if you're having to bring existing clients together, so very, very critical. Emotional discipline. You're coming out of a period where you're going to be tired. When you're going through an M&A process, it's very normal. There's going to be a sudden shift in your energy and what you do, and it's easy to get angry. It's easy to get frustrated. I always suggest a little bit of a reset to make sure you're emotionally resilient and demonstrate a lot of emotional discipline. You're learning a new operating system of your new environment as much as the company that acquired you is learning you and your products and your team, right? So super critical in that sense. So the first 90 days are not about proving your value. It's about redefining it or refining it. Yeah. You're not smaller. I mean, I didn't feel I was less valued or less important for the business when I transitioned from CEO to global COO. I was operating in something much larger, and you will be too, and that's the case. So if you're contemplating a sale or recently closed, remember this. The first 90 days don't determine the next decade. They really just simply set the tone. Patience, humility, and clarity compound far more than being a hero, right? Heroics aside, those first three items are the most important to driving value after the first 90 days. So if this episode helped demystify that transition, I invite you to subscribe to the podcast Built to Hold. Each episode is designed by me and my team to help founders think clearly, about long-term ownership. This is what it's about. Without the hype, the pressure, guess what? No sales pitch. Thanks for listening, and do me a really big favor. I want you to hit that like button at the bottom, right at the bottom, and subscribe for the next episode. Appreciate you guys. Take care.